How do we experience the presence of God? Well, God isn't especially in thoughts or emotions. He's certainly present there, but also present in much more profound ways. He's present in the absence of thoughts and emotions. This God of ours, it's good to know, is present both by his presence and by his absence. And as was suggested in the parables I've been describing this weekend, God is present in everything, even in the things you don't like, even in the things you don't like in yourself. You can't get away from this God, actually. And so to come to terms with God implies a certain acceptance of ourselves and everything else. Not that we approve of everything else or make a judgment of everything else, but everything kind of arises in our awareness in this peaceful center, which is the center of everybody else too, and which is the reason why we bond with other people, because the experience that we're having, we know is happening in them or could happen in them. So all of creation is sort of arises and passes in the divine presence or awareness, which is shared with us at the deepest level of our being. And one of the significant signs of growth in contemplative prayer is the fact that you become aware, not by trying, of this presence within you that is witnessing all your emotions and thoughts and everything that happens. Everything is going by or coming in God. God is all-embracive, as the scripture says, the Spirit of the Lord fills the earth and knows man's or woman's utterance. Now, the word know there, as I understand it, means witnesses everything that is happening with total concern and total detachment. Total freedom, in other words, which is the combination of total concern and total detachment at the same time. We don't understand that God is the resolution of opposites until we ourselves have tasted a resolution of one of our opposites and find that, for instance, that one can be very joyful and in great pain at the same time. Well, God is this way. God is infinite perfection and infinite pleasure at the same time. So that in order to find God, if we just emphasize the one or the other, we won't know God. Because God is both perfection and both utter freedom and pleasure at the same time and in a transcendent way. So the movement of contemplative prayer is to rise out of the conflict of opposites and to be able to rest in a presence, the awareness of God that is above and beyond peace and joy and all the other conflicting emotions without ceasing to feel them. But now in that aspect you feel them as they really are, as some manifestation of the divine goodness. So to answer this question briefly, if you don't have thoughts or emotions in centering prayer, how do you experience the presence of God? Exactly in that situation. Without thoughts and without emotions, that's the presence of God. We must get over the idea that God is hard to find. He's so easy to find that he's right under our nose or in our nose all the time. All the time. The spirit of the world fills everything, Absolutely everything, down to the smallest quark, if you know what a quark is. Supposed to be the lowest, the smallest constitution of the material world. Well, let's look at another question, please. I was surprised to find great fear and opposition among some Christians to centering prayer. Has this always been the case? Yes. How is it best dealt with? With great patience and respect for the people who complain about it. Why do you think this exists? Well, it's ignorance or bad formation or lack of awareness of the Christian contemplative heritage, which is very rich. Contemplative prayer is not something we invented recently. It seems to me the first word about contemplative, the whole gospel is penetrated with this contemplative dimension. It's just that people don't see it if they're trained in too literalistic an interpretation of Scripture. The best thing for them to do is to get them to read some of the fathers of the church in their homilies, which they preached to everyday people, ordinary folks. You instantly see that you cannot understand the gospel if you take it in a literal sense completely. The literal sense is a takeoff point, and that many of even in Paul's gospel of the Hebrews, you see that he allegorizes the Old Testament at great length. And so the fathers understood that the symbols and examples and teaching are really parables of grace, which describe the same activity of grace, which is eternal, everlasting, that we experience in our spiritual journey. So the Spirit is speaking to us now just as clearly and fully as he spoke to the great prophets of the Old Testament and to the contemporaries of Jesus, his disciples, and his apostles. But some people are not trained to see that, and hence their understanding of Scripture is extremely narrow and rigid, and if I dare to say so, at times stultifying. You cannot put the Spirit of God into a box. The Spirit doesn't like boxes or categories. And so there's a value up to a point, but a very limited point, to putting things into categories and schedules and ladders and whatnot. And so it's not surprising, however, that some Christians, in view of their background, can't understand what centering prayer is, and they don't see it in the background of Scripture. Well, let me give you one example from Scripture. Jesus said, if you want to pray to the Father, enter the closet or a private room, in some translations, and bolt the door, not just close it, and there pray to your Father in secret. Now, I don't think many people had private rooms in those days, and probably most of the common people Jesus was talking to didn't know what a closet was. So he's speaking about entering into our own interior heart, one of our rooms inside, one of the levels, in other words, of our consciousness, and there, excluding for the time being other thoughts and considerations, and just being. He doesn't say what you have to say. You pray to the Father. But the main idea is to be in the presence of God and to wait on God in silence and solitude. Notice the closet is a place of solitude, generally. And so it's a marvelous parable of what we're trying to do in centering prayer, entering into our interior rooms or chambers, our spirit, our intuitive faculty, and our will to God, and praying to God by our being rather than doing, and by communing with God rather than conversation. They're stages of relating with God. Like in any friend, it begins with acquaintanceship, the clumsiness of getting acquainted, and then the at easeness of friendliness, and then the commitment of friendship, and then friendship blossoming into various kinds of union, which can be, in God's case, go all the way to unity. So where are we on that level of relationship? Now, reflection on the Scripture, sacred reading is how you get acquainted. And conversation emerges from reflecting on the Scripture and your acquaintanceship with God. And effective prayer is simply the making of acts of the will in response to the wonderful things you read about God in Scripture. And so you burst forth in spontaneous acts of praise and thanksgiving. The liturgy has institutionalized some of these acts, and they now are ways in which we can learn how to make friends with God. But the whole thrust of that movement is to move towards ever greater degrees of union. In acquaintances, you can change acquaintances. But when you have a commitment to somebody, you can't back out of that without breaking somebody's heart. And when this happens, then you have all kinds of pain. So the friendship of Christ, the friendship of God, moves from conversation to communion without excluding conversation. The centering prayer never excludes any prayer, but like concentric circles, it takes up into itself those other forms of acquaintanceship and friendliness and friendship. And while maintaining them, includes them in a much more vast expression of love and intimacy, which is union. And then one returns after periods of communing to conversation and light conversation and so on, and to daily life and to daily activity, without losing the perspective of the intimacy you have. Well, it's like a couple living together for years and years and years. They chat about the coffee and who's going to put out the garbage, I suppose. Somebody has to get the mail and turn on or off the television. But they also, because of their wonderful sensitivity to each other that real love produces, they can sit on the porch, for instance, and watch a sunset and not say anything for several hours, or listen to music. And what they're enjoying is not talking or thinking, but communing, that is, being together and giving implicitly their whole person, their presence to each other. Isn't that the greatest gift you can give to somebody? Your total presence. Whatever you have to give, however humble, if you give that to somebody, it makes a great impression, and it heals something in them, because someone really cares about them. The only way you can prove that is by being totally present to someone and listening to them. So just as a couple can sit for an hour without saying anything and just giving each other their respective presence, so does God and you. You can sit for a long time and just sit. You're not thinking of anything, you're just enjoying being with the person that you love, perhaps more than anyone else, but at least deeply love. And that's a dynamic or a dimension of our relationship to God that must never be withheld from people because of their scruples or ignorance or their wrong ideas of God. Lots of people have the strangest ideas of God as a result of their early religious education. That's one of the things that you grow out of. In the dark nights, God frees one from narrow and false ideas of who or what God is. So I would expect that some Christians will not understand this, but if they see that you're improving and you give them the gift of your undivided attention and respect, they may say, well, maybe the centering prayer isn't so bad after all. But then again, we can't convince everybody in this life. It would seem that prayer, understood as a conscious awareness of and dialogue with God, would have a more profound effect on our attitudes and understandings of Him and His will for us. Definitely. Is there a place in centering prayer for this kind of consciousness and dialogue? Of course, and this can be done outside the time of centering prayer when you do scripture reading. Now, the marvelous thing about that will happen in your scripture reading is that not only is it a stepping stone to resting in God, if you know what Lectio Divina is, the prayerful reading of Scripture that moves towards resting in God, like that couple who moved through acquaintance, friendship, to communion. It not only moves in that direction, but it opens us to the realization that God is very present, always and in everything, and doesn't need a lot of words or conversation from us. And that in daily life, we may have some practice like the active prayer sentence where we repeat some word that keeps us in the presence of God, or some sentence from Scripture, or a certain attentiveness to our motivation. They called the guard of the heart in earlier times, where you notice when you're upset and sort of sleuth back to which one of the three energy centers are active and give that to God. So daily life becomes an education in self-knowledge, and with the help of the Spirit, an immense amount of healing takes place in daily life when you're attentive to the mysterious factors that are at work, because God certainly brings people into our lives and takes them out with a purpose. And when we've turned our lives over to God, then that purpose becomes more and more all-inclusive. You might think, well, what happens to our other relationships in this program? I mean, what happens to our wife or husband or our children, our peers or our workers and so on? Well, they may have their own ideas about what we're doing, which could be negative or positive. Maybe some question on that subject will emerge later in this pile. But for the moment, most of our relatives and friends will benefit from this practice. Maybe not right away, but in due time. Because they can't possibly but benefit if you and I improve. I'm thinking of one dear lady who started this prayer, and she's kind of a feisty person and upfront about her feelings, and her husband and children were kind of grumbling. She's doing this, she's late for supper, she closes the door, goes into the cellar, you know. So she brought them together one day and said, look, it's to your great advantage that I do this prayer, because you want me to put food on the table and to have a pleasant smile and to welcome you when you come home. I can't do that unless I have this 20 minutes of silence to refresh my spirit. So if you want me to be a witch, that's your choice. But if you want me to really serve your needs, then shut up and let me do my prayer. And so sure enough, they decided somewhat reluctantly to let her do the thing. And sure enough, she began to change and became sweetness itself. Welcomed everybody and didn't get angry and didn't beat up the children and so on. And so after a few months, it happened that if she was late for her time of prayer, the children would say, Mother, isn't it time for you to do your centering prayer? It doesn't always work that way, but that is one example. So just as well to negotiate with the family if they have doubts and ask, for time. Let's try this for 3 or 6 months, see if I improve or not. If I improve, it's to your benefit, isn't it? They'll probably say yes. Although there are a few people who would like you to stay as you are, because subtly, if you change, they'll have to change eventually too. And they kind of intuit that. Another question. So many of the people I meet who are practicing centering prayer are either single or, if they are married, have older children. Oh, I knew this question was coming. Do you have any suggestions for those of us who are married and have young children as to how to get 2 20-minute periods each day? A background. I find that my best bet is to try to get early, even though I can have one period of prayer before my daughter wakes up. But after she appears in the middle of my prayer time, her nap time is another time when I can try to pray, but she will soon outgrow the need for a nap. Evenings gradually aren't a possible time, dinner dishes, and the usual spiel. Well, I deeply sympathize with that, and it's a real difficulty. Suppose you do have 3 children, they're all under 6, let's say, and one is 1 or 2. Well, this is a special situation. How are you going to find 2 periods a day? Many people who don't have any children find it hard to find 2 periods a day. So now it seems to be utterly impossible. Well, it's more poignant even than this person says. I remember one lady is saying that she's tried to get up early in the morning. She had 2 children, I think 1 and 3 or something. And so she got up a half hour ahead. A huge sacrifice because she was so busy. She went into a separate room, sat down, and sure enough, after a few minutes of getting her centering prayer, one of the children, I think both of them, would come in to see what Mommy was doing. So she got up a half an hour before that. That's a whole hour. So they got up an hour. So she got up an hour and a half, and they got it. So finally she realized this wasn't going to work. They have some way of knowing when I get up, and they think the day has begun. And so one of them would crawl in her lap. Well, what are you going to do in that situation? If you're a good mother, you can't throw the child on the floor. This is my prayer time. So the inability to find time is your centering prayer for that day. See, centering prayer is not an absolute. It's something we strongly recommend. We don't offer any rules or absolutes, but guidelines. Guidelines is what works best for most people most of the time. But when there's an exception, then you have to adjust it. So this dear mother may have to figure out a way of trying to maintain a certain presence of God during the day. And if she's well instructed, she'll know that God is present in those little people, and that every need they have or every service is Christ asking for help. And so changing the diapers is as great an act as chanting in the divine office, as far as God is concerned. And so she may be able to every now and then unexpectedly find a few minutes in the day when everybody's quiet or everybody's taking a nap to do it. But she may have to postpone a twice-a-day regular practice at a certain time of the day until circumstances are a little bit better. But the difficulty itself could then be a blessing, because then the effort to find some way of maintaining the presence of God in her life may cause her to make the kind of efforts that will bring about a perpetual presence of God. Since God is everywhere, the value of centering prayer is that it it reaches deeper down into your inmost being and accelerates the process of experiencing God. But everything can be an experience of God. You are now having an experience of God, such as it is, in listening to this lecture. It's not that difficult. It's just that we think it is. And that's one of the chief illusions to get rid of. So I encourage this dear lady, or if it was a lady, to realize that she can do centering prayer simply by doing what is the essence of centering prayer, consenting to God's presence and action as she changes the diapers, or puts up with the screams and the activity and the yelling at home. You have to keep doing it. And then God has a wonderful way of providing opportunities for prayer.